Today we're going to be talking about areas where we are starting to see a slowdown in the real estate market around Raleigh, so stick around.
All right, so a couple weeks ago, we did a video that was essentially a market update, and we were talking about the slowing down of the market here in the Raleigh area. Today, we're gonna be talking a little more specifically about the areas that we're seeing slow down the most. And essentially the way we're gonna organize this video, we're gonna start with the areas that are slowing down the most and then kind of work our way from there. All right, and we're gonna be using really two different data points in order to put this together. One is percent of list price received, and essentially that's telling us how much of the list price did the seller get. Obviously, if it's above 100%, then that was a really competitive offer.
Right.
If it's below, then you're starting to see homes get
a little more negotiation.
Yeah, more leverage for the buyer. So in Wendell, we're seeing 96.7% of the list price received, which means the average buyer is getting roughly 3.5% off of the list price, which is a pretty substantial amount. When you break that down with, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 homes, 3.5% is a pretty big discount.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely getting to see that discount, and there could be additional closing cost factors that the seller put in under that do not show up in our, those aren't required public remarks. So
it will be soon though.
Yeah,
for
hopefully soon.
Yeah.
But right now it's not. So, but yeah, I mean, that's definitely, we're seeing more wiggle room given for buyers there. And in that area too, inventory from June of 2024 to June of 2023 is up by about 6.5%.
Yep.
So we're seeing more homes on the market sitting for a little bit longer.
Exactly.
So next on our list is Wake Forest. So Wake Forest, we are seeing the percent of list price received coming in around 97.5% in Wake Forest. And these are not bad numbers at all. These are just the areas that aren't getting, like, for the longest time, it felt like everywhere was like 102%, 103%. So these are areas where we're like, oh, we finally have a little bit of like negotiating power on the buy side. So that's what we're kind of seeing in the Wake Forest area right now.
And so when it comes to inventory in Wake Forest, it's up 8.9%. So that's obviously a pretty significant jump when you're looking year over year between June and June. And that's going to be a trend as we're walking through these numbers. And by the way, we're going to give some thoughts as to why we think these areas are seeing the slowdown compared to other parts of the triangle, and how some other areas are kind of holding their own, so to speak, but these areas are definitely getting hit the hardest. We're going to give our thoughts on that. But in general, you're going to see a lot of similarities between inventory increasing a substantial amount year over year in these areas and buyers getting homes for less in these areas.
Right.
All right, so the next area that's getting hit the hardest right now is Clayton. So the average list price received in Clayton is 97.8%. So buyers are getting homes for roughly 2% under what they're listed for in Clayton.
Yep. And we've seen inventory increase by about 4.5% in Clayton. So not quite as much as we did in Wake Forest. I think probably majority is because we pulled out new construction on for all of these towns, just because sometimes that can just really skew the data, because there's not a lot of like negotiation in new construction, or people add on different design options and it makes the price increase. So we wanted to pull it out just to make it feel a little more even ground. And so much of the inventory typically in Clayton is new construction. So, I'm sure there's even more inventory than that, and more than 4% more, but a lot of it's probably new construction. So this is resale only inventory.
Exactly.
So next on the list is Fuquay, pretty close with the Clayton numbers here. We're getting about 97.9% of the list price received in the Fuquay area.
Yeah, so that's only a 0.1% difference from Clayton, so pretty much neck and neck. Now, when it comes to inventory though, inventory is up in Fuquay by 12%, so that's a pretty substantial number. Anytime you see double-digit increases year over year, that's a substantial increase. And again, this is just resale. This is not including new construction, because new construction really does skew the numbers. And when you think about, and this is kind of just a side note, when you think about, a market being hot or slow, you really do just think about the resale market, because for the most part, new construction is pretty steady. There are situations where there's a competitive nature to new construction, and we've seen that this year, but in general, new construction's much more of a steady market than resale is.
Yeah, and what he means by that is, in the resale market, you go in and you're negotiating all these things with two different parties, where in when you're doing new construction, it feels more like buying a product at a store.
Yeah.
The price is what the price is listed. There's not as much like negotiation power on the build side. And then, you know, it's just a totally different process of like going about it. So.
Exactly. All right, last on the list, and then we're going to get into some reasons why we think this is happening in these areas. But Raleigh is the last one we're going to talk about, and the percent of list price received is 98.4%. Obviously, Raleigh is a massive area, but when you break it, and we did break it down by zip code as we were kind of looking at it. We kind of looked at North Raleigh, we looked at South Raleigh, and there's not a substantial difference between the regions, so we felt comfortable talking about Raleigh as a whole. But in excuse me, I think the humidity made me choke up. Yeah. But in general, Raleigh, buyers are getting homes in Raleigh for about 1.5% less than what they're listed for.
Yeah, yep. And that's really interesting because you would think like Raleigh won't be on the list. It's like the main area, you know, but just because there is so much inventory to choose from, we are up 25% in inventory in Raleigh from this June to last, which is
crazy.
Wild. It'd be interesting to see the next few months into the summer that like huge double digit continues. But yeah, it is crazy. And it's very humid, as Zach mentioned. So we probably look like glistening Twilight vampires.
I feel like I'm just filming this in a swimming pool.
Yeah.
I might as well be.
In case you didn't know, it's humid in North Carolina in the summer. So kind of getting into the reasons we think that these are the towns that seem to be the most impacted so far. And like we mentioned before, it's not like receiving 98% is like a loss.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't like a doomsday scenario, right? This isn't 2008. This is just, it's just a slowing
But
market.
it's also not 2021 when, you know, you knew your house was going to sell even if you did absolutely nothing to it. It was going to sell quickly. You know, it's just a little bit different. And
to put it into, sorry to interrupt, but put it into context, because Cindy pulled these numbers too. Cary, Apex, Holly Springs, those areas are roughly receiving 100% of list price. That kind of compares like competitive areas that we're still seeing competition exist with areas where we're seeing buyers have more leverage. So, anyway.
For sure. Yeah, and that is important. It's not like this everywhere. Obviously, town by town and house by house, it's going to vary dependent upon that. And the reason we kind of think some of the locations we mentioned today is probably just, with the exception of Raleigh, these are like probably the further out suburbs of Raleigh. They're still not that far from Raleigh, but you know, if we're going to start to see a market shift, I think we can expect that market shift's going to happen first in the less in demand areas that are a little further from town, and then maybe they'll trickle their way into that Cary, Apex, Holly Springs area later this summer. So we're going to have to continue looking at the data to see, but that's kind of our best guess as to the location, and then another factor being how much new construction is in those further out areas. Yeah,
and that's, so when you think about Wendell, Clayton, Fuquay, Wake Forest, you're really talking about areas, and with the exception of Raleigh, you're really talking about areas that have an enormous amount of new construction. And so in general, those areas tend to struggle on the resale side, because if you go into an area where there's multiple neighborhoods within a very small radius that are building new homes, and you're a resale house, you're obviously at a disadvantage because a buyer can just choose a brand new house where they get a lot of say. They can pick the design options. Maybe there's some incentives attached to that particular home. Maybe there's a better interest rate incentive that the builder's offering. Whatever it is, resale in those neighborhoods just tends to really struggle. And so when you're talking about at least 4 of the areas that we talked about today, you're talking about areas where there's just a high concentration of new construction that exists, which just makes it more challenging for the resale market.
For sure. So those are our best guesses as to why Raleigh being on the list. I think it's such a big area, you know,
and inventory being up 25%. I mean, that is massive. And so that in general is gonna lower the price points.
Right, exactly. Because you have a lot of options, right?
Yeah.
People don't have to pick between 2 houses. They can pick between 10, and they just have longer to make a decision, and they can it's just a totally different situation than a year ago, which is good for buyers. So this is great news for buyers. So if you are looking and you're like, there's no way I want to be involved in a competitive situation, some of these towns that we mentioned earlier in the video could be really good options for you. And some that we just mentioned now, Cary, Holly Springs, Apex, and Chapel Hill, those are ones that I think we still need to go in with realistic expectations that you're probably not going to have a lot of negotiation power as a buyer at this point.
But even like if a place like a Carrier Apex is receiving, you know, right at 100%, that just means they're getting asking price.
Right.
So that's so that, you know, it doesn't always mean that there's this crazy bidding process. There could be, and that does still exist, but it's not like these areas are getting 102% or 103% of list price, which we have seen in the past.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I'm Zach, this is my beautiful wife, Cindy. We are a couple of real estate agents in the Raleigh area. So if you're looking to buy or sell, we'd love to be your real estate resource of choice. You can find us at the contact info below, and you can also find us on Instagram.
Yep, we would love to have you follow along with us on Instagram. You can find us at the Honeycutt Realtors, or you can find us at the RDU Buzz. That one kind of goes over more news and development in the area. We'd love to have you follow along on both pages, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Yep, we'll see you next time.